Those can see it in America.
Right, so I can watch it after.
So you can watch it again in America, right? Okay.
I lost my computer, so I have to watch everything all over.
What do you mean?
I mean, my computer died. So
You don't have any notes, or you don't have any?
notes from the previous classes. So,
Ah.
so it's good.
I can scan. I don't scan my notes in a notebook, but if I can scan and move every once in a while. I mean, I don't know how much you'll understand from that, but just take notes. Okay. Teacher's notes. Okay. Okay. Mamzerut. There are two things that I want to discuss in connection with mamzerut. First of all, the definition of mamzerut and what exactly is asur. That's what it means. And secondly, the issue of safek mamzer. There are a lot of sources on safek mamzerut, but we're not learning the fourth parak of Kiddushin. So I just gave you basically a tshuva of Moshe. So I'm going to talk about. I'll give you a little bit of background, and we'll talk about that at the end. Okay. Okay. First, let's talk about how.
This is one tshuva addressing various issues.
Well, it's really one issue. He has a nice kasha in the teretz, but we'll get to it, I hope. Okay. So, the first thing is what creates mamzerut. The second thing we're going to talk about is what is the isser of the mamzer lavo bakahal. Okay. And we'll see if there's a connection between those two things. Okay. So, of course, first we have the pasuk lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem gam dor asiri lo yavo lo b'kal Hashem. So there's an isur bi'ah l'kahal Hashem of a mamzer. What is a mamzer? So we see, if you go to, there are really two independent sources, it would seem, that talk about what creates mamzerut. The first is the Mishnah in Masechet Yevamot, and the second is the Mishnah in Masechet Kiddushin, and they focus on different things. So let's just take this slowly. Okay? First, the Mishnah in Yevamot. It's on page 2. The pages are numbered. Okay? It's on page 2. Okay? Mishnah, Mem Tet Amud Bet in Yevamot. Eizehu mamzer, kol she'er basar shehu below yavo. Divrei Rabbi Akiva. As long as there's an isur lo ta'aseh, that could create, if there's an isur lo ta'aseh in the bi'ah, that would create mamzerut. Okay? Shimon ha-Timni omer, kol shechayavim alav karet bidei shamayim. Anytime there's a chiyuv karet in the bi'ah, there's not chayvei lavin, but there's chiyuv karet, that will create mamzerut. Rabbi Yeshua omer, kol shechayavim alav mitat beiti. Okay, he limits it the most. Only sexual relations which have mitat beitin as the punishment attached to them, only that creates mamzerut. Okay, what's in common with these three, it seems, right, is the focus is what is the punishment for the sexual action. Right? Is it chayvei lavin? Is it chayvei krisus? Or is it mitat beitin? Okay, that's in general we're talking about. You could say chumrat ha isur habi'ah. Okay? That's what we have here in this Mishnah. If you take a look at the Mishnah Masechet Kiddushin, it does talk about aveira, but it also talks about something else. Kol makom sheyesh kiddushin ve'ein aveira. That's hopefully most cases. That's most cases, right? Where kiddushin are tofsim, and there's no isser in them. Havlad holech achar hazachar. Okay, so that's the shevet is determined by the man, right? Ve'eza zo. Zo kohenet leviav Yisraeli shenis'u lekohen leviv Yisrael. Okay, anybody kasher that married anybody else kasher, so it goes after the zachar. Okay, so bat kohen that marries Yisrael, the children are Yisraeli, right? Bat Yisrael marries a Kohen, the children are Kohanim. Okay? Okay, so that's the first case. Yesh Kiddushin ve'ein Aveira. Okay? V'chol makom sheyesh Kiddushin ve'yesh Aveira. Okay, that would be Chayve Lavin. Maybe not according to Rabbi Akiva, but we're not getting into that yet. Okay? V'chol makom sheyesh Kiddushin ve'yesh Aveira. Havlad olech achar pagum. Doesn't matter which side. If there's an Aveira in the Kiddushin, if it's mamzer al bat Yisrael or Yisrael mamzeret, or Kohen to Grusha, or Kohen Gadol to an Almana, etc., etc., or Amoni uMoavi toch kedei dorot, okay, etc. Havlad holech achar pagum. Ve'eze zo almana l'kohen gadol, gusha v'chalutza l'kohen edyot, mamzeret unetina liYisrael. Bat Yisrael mamzeret unetin. Okay? V'chol mi she'ein la alav kiddushin, aval yesh la al acherim kiddushin. Right? It's not that the kiddushin are not tufsim for this person, but just it's the relationship for which there's no kiddushin tufsim. Okay? Havlad mamzer. Ve'eze zeh. Zeh abal achat mikol arayot shabatorah. So the definition here is arayot. Okay? V'chol mi she'ein la lo alav v'lo ala acherim kiddushin. Havlad kimota. Ve'eze zeh. Zeh vlad shivcha v'nochrit. Okay? So there's no kiddushin, but there's no kiddushin for anyone. Right? So then that's basically relations with a guy. Okay? So then it goes after the woman. Right? The woman's not Jewish, the kid's not Jewish. The woman is Jewish, the kid is Jewish,
It
etc.
sounds like Judaism gets passed through the father, it's just non-Judaism that gets passed through the mother.
No. That's just the formula, kol sheyesh, kol sheyesh. I wouldn't... it doesn't talk about Judaism of the father at all. It talks about the Shevet. Yeah, that's in terms of the Shevet. That's the Shbechotam Leveit Avotam.
It's not also according to who, meaning, obviously the Shevet, it means you're Jewish, meaning, it's...
Yeah, because...
It's so funny, when you read it, it's interesting, because we always assume this is when one gets to do something, but it's not really that. It's just when she is not Jewish that we get.
So there's a negative formulation, but I mean, I think it's the same. In any case, we're not talking about patrilineal descent here, right? We want to know about mamzerut. Okay? So, here...
The test case would be if he's not Jewish, the father's not Jewish, the child is still Jewish.
Yes, that's holech achareha, so she's Jewish then. Well, yeah.
Right.
So it's not just not Judaism passed through.
No, well, it's not about Judaism.
We're not talking about this. We're not talking about this. Okay. What this Mishnah is stressing regarding mamzerut is two things: kiddushin tovsim. It does talk about yesh aveira, right? But it talks about this. It introduces something which wasn't in the previous Mishnah: kiddushin tovsim, and the status of arayot. Zehaba. What's the case? Zehaba. Havlad mamzer zehaba lachat mikol arayot shabatorah. Okay. So there's no kiddushin tovsim, and there's arayot. So there's no kiddushin tovsim and arayot. Then the offspring of that union is a mamzer. Okay? So in general, we have just two different ways of looking at it, right? That comes from the two different Mishnayot. One, so I can formulate the question this way. What causes mamzerut? Is it the Aveira that causes mamzerut? Or is it the fact that there was a union, not the Aveira per se, but there was a union between two people by which either we say Kiddushin are in Tovsim, or we say the union between two people is a case of Gili Arayot. But not because of the Ma'aseh Aveira itself.
Union means bia, or union means the fact
You know
that
the
they
bia.
came together that there's a
They came together
descendant.
to make a child.
Well, no, because that was Moshe's tshuva, right? The difference.
Yes, I'm not going to talk. We'll talk
Well,
about that
that's
later.
okay.
That's a nafkamina. Right?
Right.
Say your two names again, please.
The question is, what creates mamzerut? Is it the fact that there was a biat isur? Right? Or it's not the biat isur per se which concerns us, but rather the fact that two people came together to have a child, people had sexual relations, they had a child, these two people are not supposed to come together. Not because of the Aveirah, but their union is problematic, either because Ein Kiddushin Tovsim, right? Or it's a status of Gilui Arayot.
I don't get the difference.
We'll see.
Because it's also the mission in Kiddushin is only formulated that way, Kiddushin Tovsim, for the last case.
Oh, Sheken, oh, Shalo, you know. But it's we have Erva and Kiddushin Tovsim, which is not mentioned in the Mishnah. It's just a different focus. It's not necessarily a stira, but there are different focus, and it could be a very simple nafkamina in terms of you don't have the Isser Bia, but you do have the zera is from somebody that Kiddushin is not Tovsim, right? The artificial insemination that Moshe talks about. That's the nafkamina.
But that's
right?
not the. But what's the difference?
What do you mean? What's the
Which,
difference?
where would artificial insemination? There isn't bia.
Artificial insemination, there's no bia, but there is a chibur of zera from two people. There's no Kiddushin
Oh, they're
Tovsim.
not coming together. I'm sorry.
I put it in a romantic way, but it means
Not
that
very
the
romantic.
okay. So that's in broad strokes, but let's look at it a little more closely. Okay. So first of all, we have a Gemara on Daf Memtet in Yivamot. It's a continuation on this Mishnah, where Amar Abaye, if you go right before Memtet Amud Bet, you see the bottom of Memtet Amud Aleph.
I'm still not understanding, why is that case of the artificial insemination not the
Well-
last case in the Mishnah?
What?
Why is the artificial insemination not the last case?
Artificial insemination is a case where there's no biat isur, but there is a mixture of zera which shouldn't be mixed, so to speak.
Right, but that's
So-
the last case in the Mishnah, and the last case in the Mishnah doesn't call that a mamzer.
What do you mean the last case in the Mishnah?
The case of the Jew and the non-Jew.
Who says artificial insemination is Jew and a non-Jew?
That's the example you just gave.
No.
You're saying what would happen if you had artificial
And
insemination?
artificial
where-
insemination, if a woman is married and she has and they give her zera of someone else.
that she's related to.
No, that she's to
A
not,
mamzer-
someone's
of a
not her
mamzer.
husband.
He's married. and-
Or right? You get whatever the Gilia, right? Whatever the zera is. Right. Okay. Let's take a look at the Gemara here. The Gemara at the end of Mem Tet Amud Aleph. Okay. Amar Abaye, Hakol Modim Biva'al Hanida Va'al Hasota She'ein Havlad Mamzer. Okay? Even though Nida has a chiyuv karet, okay, everyone is moda. Presumably, Rabbi Yeshua doesn't have to be moda to this because it doesn't come to this for him, right? But both for Rabbi Akiva and Shimon HaTimni, there's a need for them to be moda. She'ein avlad mamzer. Why? Nida dahatafsi ba kiddushin. Okay, so the Gemara is introducing tfisat kiddushin, right? So even though Nida is a chiyuv karet, right, nonetheless there's no creation of mamzerut since there's tfisat kiddushin. Shenemar utehi nidata alav afilu b'shat nidata tafsi ba kiddushin. Okay, that's a drush of Chazal. That has nothing to do with pshat in the pasuk, right? Pshat in the pasuk is tumat boel nida, where he gets the nida is tmei shiv'ah. And Boel Nida is also Tamei Shiv'ah, right? It's not Tumas, one second, it's not Tumas Maga, right? It's like, it's a special Tumah, right? It's like Halal Cherev, I'm not going to get to Dinei Tumatara here. But the Tumah that she has, there's no going down one level. Boel Nida is Tamei like the Nida itself. That's about Tehi Nidat Alav, right? But Chazal being Dorish, Lashon Havaya being, right? Lashon Havaya is nisuin, right? Tfisat kiddushin, right? V'halcha v'hayta li'ish acher, that's havaya. V'tehi nidata alav, that even though she's a nida, he could still be mekadosh and kiddushin b'tovsim. That's the drush of Chazal. Okay. So we see from here that it depends on b'afilu b'shat nidata tafsi b'kiddushin. Okay. So since there's tfisat kiddushin, even though it's chiyuv karet, there's no mamzerut which is created. So that leads us to, you can then look back at this, at these different dayot and say, well, maybe the reason Shimon HaTimni says Kol Shechav Karet B'dei Shamayim is creates mamzerut. Karet is not really what creates the mamzerut. It's not chumrat isur ha'avera, as you would think just from reading the Mishnah. Something which these are indicators that kiddushin is not tovsin, right? Chiyuv karet ain't kiddushin tovsin, and that's why it's mamzerut, right? But the real criteria is kiddushin tovsin, and the proof is that you have a chiyuv karet where there is kiddushin tovsin, namely nida, and there is no mamzerut. So you see that karet is more of a general symptom or sign of something else. But the real determining factor is whether kiddushin tovsin. Okay? Then, if that's the case, right? So then let's take a look at Rabbi Akiva. Okay? So Rabbi Akiva says, "Kol sher basar shehu below yavo." Right? In other words, chayve lavin. Okay? So what does Rabbi Akiva hold? If he holds also chayve lavin, so this depends. The machloket in the Gemara in Ketubot. Within Dat Rabbi Akiva, whether Rabbi Akiva holds Kiddushin Tovsin B'chayve Lavin or Ein Kiddushin Tovsin B'chayve Lavin. Okay? So if Rabbi Akiva holds Kiddushin Tovsin B'chayve Lavin, but nonetheless Chayve Lavin create Mamzerut, okay? So then what Rabbi Akiva is saying is that it's the Isser Bia that creates Mamzerut, and you don't need the chomer of a chiyuv karet or chiyuv mitat beitin, right? Even an isser lo ta'aseh will also create mamzerut, but it's the isser bia which creates the mamzerut. That's one way of explaining Rabbi Akiva. But if you say that Rabbi Akiva holds that ein kiddushin tovsim even b'chayve lavin, right? So then that could be one of two things which are of course related. That you see from that it's not necessarily the isser bia, but rather the fact that Ein Kiddushin Tovsin. And then maybe Rabbi Akiva says something even more than that. Maybe Rabbi Akiva thinks that Chiyuvei Lo Ta'aseh are also Gilui Arayot. That's an important thing, right? Because Gilui Arayot is Yereg Vayavor. So if Chayve Lavin is not Gilui Arayot, it's like any other Isser in the Torah. So if it's in the case of Yeharei, if your life is endangered, so we say Ya'avor Val Yeharei. It's not Gilui Arayot. But if you say that it is Chayve, that it is Gilui Arayot, so then it's Yereg Val Yavor. So that would make Kohen to a Grusha or Kohen Gadol to an Almana Yereg Val Yavor, according to Rabbi Akiva, right? So it could be, again, Rabbi Akiva would hold that the creation of Mamzerut, if Ein Kiddushin Tovsim, is because of Gilui Arayot, okay? Or because Ein Kiddushin Tovsim. Okay?
Maybe I don't know what I'm thinking. His language of Kol Sher Basar is the language of Vayikra. I don't understand why you would ever assume.
Oh, so this is also a question of machloket within Rabbi Akiva, whether it's any Chayve Lavin or only Chayve Lavin which are derived from Sher Basar, like Anusat Aviv, because of the family relationship that's created. Because you need a Sher Basar that's Chayve Lavin. You understand? Sher Basar normally is the blood relations which are at least Chayve Krisos, right? What would it be a Sher Basar that only has Chayve Lavin?
I just don't understand what's even in this category.
So I just told you. Okay. So there are cases because of the family, because of connection through marriage of a relation. That would be a Sher Basar, which is Chayve Lav. Okay? So the question whether Rabbi Akiva limits it to that or any Lo Ta'aseh. Okay? Okay, so from Rabbi Akiva, we could really go both ways. Right? If either it's the Isser Lo Ta'aseh, or it's because Rabbi Akiva expands where Kiddushin is not Tofes, and maybe that means he expands what the definition of Gilui Arayot is. Okay? Rabbi Yoshua. Okay? Rabbi Yoshua certainly holds that Chayve Karet is Gilui Arayot and Ein Kiddushin Tovsin. He doesn't say, Yeshua doesn't say any place that in order for Kiddushin not to be Tofes, you need a Chiyuv Mitat Beitin. Right? He doesn't say that. Right? So he agrees in terms of Kiddushin Tovsim that depends on Chiyuvei Karet. But in order to create Mamzerut, right? It has to be a chiyuv mitat beitin. So he holds at least, right, that there's chumrat ha'ma'aseh is what creates the mamzerut. Whether he holds chumrat ha'ma'aseh alone is sufficient, but it also, since it's also gilui arayot and it's also ein kiddushin tofsim, together with chumrat ha'ma'aseh, that's impossible to know. But at least what he requires, in addition to chiyuv karet, is that it should be a case of chiyuv mitat beitin. That is because what concerns him here is chumrat ha'ma'aseh. Okay? Okay.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Where do we know that Kiddushin aren't Tofsim, the Chayvei Arayot?
So that's the sugyot here and the sugyot in sugyot in kiddushin. They derive that. They ain't the kiddushin tops. Kiddushin not tops. Okay. Now, just as a way of so we said the nafkamina. Let's take a look at this tshuva of Rav Moshe. Okay, I gave you two tshuvas. First tshuva. The discussion about artificial insemination. The case is, right, you have a woman who's married, and we're going to be mazrik zera, which is not from her husband. Okay? Alternatively, he wants to talk about that a woman who's a pnuya would want artificial insemination. But you could have a similar case if she gets, with much more rare, right, that the zera would be from someone who is an erva to her. Her brother zera, her father zera, right? Her son zera, right? So that would be the analogous case, okay? So he basically says, right? Hinei b'davar isha asher avru ke'eser shanim v'lo yalda v'chisaron amru harofim shu mimenu, that it's the husband is the cause of the infertility. Shelachem machmat sheratzta loholid ben kirtzon kol anashim. And even though the halach is the law we saw, the law mifkeda isha mitzvat puravu, mikomakom kofin abal legarshav litein laktuba betana, that she has a right to say she wants children, even if it doesn't have to be that she's mitzvah. She wants children. Okay. So what did he say here? Okay. Halcha larofe, the first line on top. So she went to the doctor. V'zarak berachma zera shel ish acher shelo b'rshut ba'ala. I don't think b'rshut ba'ala should make a difference. It's interesting. That just has to do with the relations between them.
So
okay?
at the end,
she got artificially inseminated.
At the end, he discusses the Lo B'rshut Ba'ala, that he might not have to support the.
Oh, okay, fine. That's okay. All right. V'nish'al malat kvodo mehabal im muteret lo ve'echu din avlad. So first of all is the kid a mamzer, but he also asks if is she considered to be a sota, right? V'nei barur shebelo biat ish lo nesra isha leba'ala. That's the first thing. Ve'isur sotala ba'ala rak mitzad isra abiyah v'lo mitzad hazera shel ish acher sheyesh b'me'eh. Din ba'ala ish acher af b'biyah shelo yatsa zera. Okay, af shelo kedarka, so she's still out. She's nesra al ba'ala mitin sota. V'im ba'zera legufa shelo mibiyah ke'ambati shenizkar b'gemara shelo naseh isur znut lo nesra al ba'ala. So that clearly depends on the isur znut. Okay, v'chein avlad hu kasher shegam mamzerut hu rak כשהיה על ידי ביאה. ואף שהוולד ממזר, אף באופן שדיבקום נוכרים זה בזו, even if it's anus, but you still need bia. You don't need bia that before that there's a chiyuv mitah. Even if it was onus, you don't need this case. Even if there's some sort of mitasek, right? If there's a misidentity person thought it was his wife, it turned out not to be his wife, right? Things like that. Yaakov and Leah, right? Shelo avru al isur, right? Mishum shayu anusim. Mikom makom, haya ze derech biyah shu znut. Aval b'shnit abra yidei shenechnas hazer shel acher b'me'el b'ambati shenizkar b'gemara, etc. Okay, so he says that it depends, put it this way, that a necessary prerequisite for creation of mamzerut is that there should be biat znut. Okay, it may not be sufficient, right? That's what we were talking about before, right? But it's a necessary prerequisite. Okay, so it's not merely that there's gilui arayot. It's not merely that ein kiddushin tofsim between these two people, right? But there was actually biat isur. Okay.
It sounds like you wouldn't even call this Gilui Arayot.
Right. No, there was no gilui arayot.
Yeah.
Right. There's no isur gilui arayot, but the chibur together is a chibur of two people who are erva to each other. Right. Okay. Now, let's talk about what the ramifications might be in terms of how I understand the status of a mamzer. Okay? If you would say that what creates mamzerut is the isur itself, nothing else, okay? And then you can just argue on what level of chumrat ha'isur. If you want to say that's what the Mishnah and Yevamot is talking about, and that really determines that this Rabbi Akiva holds even Chayve Lavin, and Shimon Timni holds Chayve Krisos, and Rabbi Yeshua holds Chayve Mitot Beitin. But they're all arguing on this. They're all agreeing in principle that what creates mamzerut is the fact that there was a biat isur of a certain level of severity. Okay, that's what creates mamzerut. Okay, if that's the case, then how do I look at this mamzer who's created by this isser? There's room to say then that I look at this mamzer, so there's nothing, the parents did something, right? It's the masa isser. So of course you come to the injustice, right? There's nothing wrong with this person. But you could say that it's a, what's the word? I'm thinking of like a disincentive, but there's a better word. What's a disincentive?
Deterrent.
A deterrent, right, that's the word I'm looking for, right. It's a deterrent to the parents. Before people have relations with your asur, they'll think twice, because they'll think if we have a child, that child won't be able to marry into Kahal Yisrael. So it's a way of trying to keep people at bay that you should know, and the truth is what keeps people very often from marrying in situations where there would be a mamzer. And they themselves, maybe they're not Shomer Halacha, but they don't want their kid to be a mamzer, right? So it actually does, or the birth control, which they knew how to do then also, but it's not as simple. Okay, so
Not as effective.
so in any case, that's I think if you focus on the Maaseh Isur, then you have, the situation is that there's nothing, so to speak, wrong with the child. It's just a way of dissuading, it's deterring the parents from a Maaseh Aveira. Okay? I'm just throwing that out as a possibility. We'll see there's another way of looking at it.
Nothing wrong with the child.
There's not, we'll see, okay, so let's...
Because you could say he's somehow contaminated.
Right, so I'm saying he's not contaminated, right?
But you could still have that svara.
You could still have it.
Maser Isser creates like a genetically bad.
It
person.
could.
I don't know what it means to have something wrong. But.
Okay, so I think that comes out from other ways of looking at it, but not here. Okay, now let's talk about a different aspect of the Isser, namely once you have them, you have your mamzer, right? However, the mamzer was created. Okay? What exactly can't the person do? Right? It says lo yavo. What's the pasuk? Right? Lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem gam dorasi lo yavo lo b'kal Hashem. So the language of lo yavo b'kal Hashem is a little ambiguous. Okay? So there's a machlokes between the Rambam and the Ravid, exactly what the Isser is. We go back to the first page. We have as follows. All right, Perek Tedvav, Halacha Aleph. Ezu mamzer, Hilchot Yisrei B'Av, the Rambam. Ezu mamzer, ha'amur b'Torah, ze haba me'erva min ha'arayot. Chutz min hanida, שהבן ממנה פגום ואינו ממזר. Okay? It's not ממזרות. אבל הבעל שאר עריות, בין באונס, בין ברצון, בין בזדון, בין בשגגה, הוולד ממזר. ואחד זכרים ואחד נקבות אסורים לעולם, שנאמר גם דור עשירי, כלומר לעולם. Okay? So, the Isser, the way the Rambam has it, is Haba'al Ha'arayot. Okay? And there's something very interesting, which I'll say parenthetically here, which is a whole question of whether Nida is considered Gili Arayot. From the Rambam's language indicates that he thinks Nida is Gili Arayot. Because he says, Haba min ha'al min arayot chutz min ha'nida. Right? And then he says, Haba'al shar ha'arayot. Right, the nida is an erva, but even though the nida is an erva, since it's an erva which is an exception because kiddushin tovsim, right, so therefore nida does not create, even though nida is arayot, nida does not create mamzerut. Okay? So that's a separate issue of whether nida is considered arayot, and of course the nafkamina is also yerev al yavor. Okay? Alright. Okay, halacha bet. Okay? What's the Isser? Echad mamzer shenasa Yisraelit. He's talking about getting married. Right? O Yisraeli shenasa mamzeret. Kevan sheba'alu achar hakidushin lokin. There's two things. There was kiddushin and there was bia. Okay? Kidesh v'lo ba'al. Eino loken. Ba'al v'lo kidesh, einan lokin. Mishum mamzerut. Okay, it would be us. Remember, the Rambam holds panuya ba'al. It's panuya ba'al pnuya. So that's a different issue, but it's not mishum mamzerut. She'ein lecha b'chol chai ve'lavin, mi she'lokeh al bi'ilah lo kiddushin, el kohen gadol ba'almana kamo she'yitba'er. Okay. So the Rambam holds that with regards to mamzerut and other isurei kahal as well, whenever it says lo yavolo b'kal, like again Amoni uMoavi, right, or Mitzri ve'Edomi, right? How does it go? Amoni and Moavi is the men are usher all the time, and the women are mutarot miyad. Okay, and Mitzri and Edomi, everybody is usher lid ador revi'i. Okay. So in those cases, within the parameters of the Isser, it always says Lo Yavolem B'Kal Hashem. So the Rambam says, when is there Malkot for the Isser? If there's Kiddushin and Bia. Okay? The Ravid says, the Ravid disagrees. The second Ravid, Katav HaRavid, Amar Avraham, Lo nitba'er v'lo nitba'er, v'omra lo yitpa'er. Okay, got inspired for a little poem for us. Ki ta'ut gadol hi, hashte iser kahuna dichtiv be lo yikach, amrinan ba'al v'lo kidesh lo keh, hanak psulin de lo ktiv behu, ela bi'a lechuda lo kol shekeh. Okay, so bi'a, he understands, lo yavo b'kal Hashem, he understands as bi'a. I mean, he shall not enter the congregation of the Lord, right? But it means, lo yavo, you shouldn't have bia with anyone who's a member of the congregation of the Lord, okay? Vadinotein, shabia te'aser, kidei shelo yarbeh mamzerut b'Yisrael. Okay? So the Ravid holds that bia alone, right? You don't need kiddushin. Bia alone person is over the Isser of mamzerut. Okay.
According to the Rambam, if you said Bia, would Vlad be a mamzer still?
Yeah, the Vlad would be a
You
mamzer.
just wouldn't transgress.
Right, you wouldn't be over the Isser Bia of Habala Mamzer or Bala Mamzeret.
But it would still
Right.
transgress.
Yeah, because it goes after the psul.
Right, okay.
Right. Now, let's start with the Rambam. The Rambam holds then, as opposed to Gilui Arayot, right? When you talk about Gilui Arayot, it's clear that you're talking about either. We talked about this last year. We talked about the nature of Machalot Asurot, if you remember. Where you can talk about the Maisa Bia being Asur, or you can talk about the Hana'ah that you get from the Bia being Asur. Okay? Either way, I'm not going to get into the analysis of the sugya to that level, but either way, what you're talking about is that the relationship between the people, if there's in a sense, if there's an erva here, that vis-a-vis sexual relations, this person to me is like a piece of neveil.
Okay.
Right? If you're talking about Gilui Arayot, okay? So the Isser Bia, this person, regarding Isser Bia, let me stress that, okay? Regarding the Isser Bia, is a Chefta Shel Isser. Okay? It's Asur for me to derive benefit or to have sexual relations through the derivation of pleasure through sexual relations, or it's merely the act of sexual relations with this person, this guf, this other person, this guf who is to me an erva. Okay, the guf is usher to me, okay, of that person. Okay? When you talk about chayve lavin, that's not the case. The proof is very simple according to the Rambam, because if a person has sexual relations with chayve lavin, there's no, you're not over the lav sexual relations. What you need is kiddushin and the sexual relations. So what does the Rambam hold? The Rambam holds lo yavo b'kal Hashem means that they really, it means in the simple, it's closer to the pshat. They should not enter kahal Hashem. Then you have to say, what does it mean to belong to the community, right? What does it mean to enter into the community? Entering into the community means to marry in. We don't let, it's the Isser is not the Bia per se, it's attaching yourself to the community. How? So that could be in a lot of different ways. A priori, you could think about a lot of ways to say you don't let them in. You can literally not give them a visa and not let them in Ben Gurion. Lo yavo b'kal Hashem, right? So we say no, that's not what it means. Right? What it means is we don't let them marry in. But the issue is becoming part of the community. And how do you ultimately become part of the community? When you marry in and you have sexual relations. So then you're part of the community. You have sexual relations with your spouse, who's part of the community. Right? You see this actually, this approach, from the way the Sefer HaChinuch says it. Right? Take a look in the Sefer HaChinuch. He says, Shenimna, right? Shelo yikach Sefer HaChinuch mitzvah Taf Kuf Samach. Shelo yikach mamzer bat Yisrael. Okay? Shenimna hamamzer milisa bat Yisrael. Val ze ne'emar lo yavo mamzer b'kal Hashem. Klomar, shelo yavo lisa isha mibnot kal Hashem. Aval likanesi mahem b'chol ha'mekomot moshvoteihem, that they should be able to come into my house, right? Or to come into my city. It's not like a mitzorah that it's nishlach mi machanot, right? We have situations where people are mushlachim from machanot, right? That's dinei tumah, right? So some tmeim are nishlach mi machanah achat, some tmeim nishlach mi beit machanot, some people are nishlach mi gimel machanot, right? So it's not that he's not like a mitzorah that he can't be in a ir choma, that he's mushlach michutz lemachane Yisrael, right? Aval likanesim mahem b'chol ha'mekomot moshvoteihem v'lisav v'liteni mahem. He's not in cherem, right? B'chol ha'dvarim mutar be'emet ke'echad mibnei Yisrael. Okay, right? Ukvar amruzal shemamzer talmid chacham kodem b'kriyat haTorah lekohen am haaretz. Okay, So the Isser Lavo B'Kal Hashem is interpreted to mean to enter into the community through marriage. Okay? That's the ultimate being part of the community. Can I marry in? Right? That's really the test case. But it's not.
It's a little bit weird, the marrying phrase.
Yeah.
He's in. I mean, he's Jewish. I don't
He's
know what
definitely
he meant.
Jewish, and his inability to be part of Kal Hashem, as opposed to, we're going to talk about Gerut later on in the year, as opposed to, say, the status of Amoni Moavi, or Mitzri Adomi Toch Dorot, there, the language of the Rambam indicates that their Isur Lavo B'Kahal is because they're not entirely Jewish. They were Mitgayer, but they're Toch Kedei Dorot, they're not Jewish enough to enter. They're partially Jewish. Okay? That Gerut is not complete. If you look at the Rambam carefully, that's his language. But here, the stress is, and mamzer is 100% Jewish. Okay? But he's not allowed to join part of the community that's called Kahal Hashem. Right? There are other parts of the community that are also not Kahal Hashem. Gerim is not considered Kahal Hashem. Okay? That's why mamzer can marry a ger. But the Isser here is not an Isser Bia per se. Right? The Isser is joining the community. What, for the purposes of the Halacha Mamzerut, what does joining the community mean? Marrying in that sense. Okay? The Ravid, though, because that's the Rambam. It's not an Isser Bia per se. Bia is, in a sense, the continuation of the marriage. Right? So if they just get married, there's no Bia, so he's not really in yet. Right? It hasn't been... Talk about the consummation of the marriage, right? So that's the Rambam. But the Ravid says that only be. You don't need Kiddushin. Okay? So you could say... Yeah.
So a ger is not considered...
What?
A ger is not considered
It says
B'Kal
Kal,
Hashem, but is allowed to marry in and become part of Kal Hashem?
A ger
So
is himself not Kal Hashem, but there's no Issur for... but he can enter in. But he can also... A ger can also marry a mamzer. Mamzer can marry a ger. Okay. Obviously, these types of definitions, right? We talk when you look at person's, if you want to put it in terms of ethnic history or biological history, and you give them status based on that, it's obviously at odds with the way we normally think about how you look at people and how you relate to them. I mean, I understand the problem. Okay? Got to say it again. Fine.
You
I'll
always
say
have
it.
to say it.
I always have to say it. Okay. You don't trust me.
This is a new
Okay.
topic to say.
No,
It's a
okay.
new topic to
I
say
know.
about.
It's a new topic to say
You
it.
don't go in the room, his parents are gay, and you don't know anything. It's
I know.
very important to say.
I know. It's true. I once taught, when I started teaching a long time ago, I was teaching in the Gush, and there was a ger in the class I didn't know. And we're doing Gezel Ager, or Gezel Akum, right? And there's one day that's what it's still from Goyim, so I just said it, I didn't get into it, right? And then I found out afterwards, it was, the whole story happens. Anyway, yeah.
If the ger marries a mamzer, the children are still mamzerim.
Yes, children mamzerim, right? It's a holech achar psul.
There's definitely the original thing of it, some genetic understanding about a negative genetic feeling and.
Well, they know about genetics,
I don't mean
but
genetic I meant
there's
like
some-
a perception of
so let's see.
holy seed and damaged seed and what types of seed we want to mix together.
Being Jewish is the fact of being Jewish is you don't declare faith and become a Jew. It's not just in conversion, right? The fact that you have a parent who's Jewish and then you're a Jew and you don't have to make a declaration of faith implies there's a family or whatever you call it, national element that has to do with descent. It's a different definition than the modern. For whatever it has implications across the
Obviously,
board.
But this stuff about mamzer and about ger and who they can marry is linked to those.
Right.
But we'll see. But there's certain things which let's just hold on, okay? It's not good, but it's not as bad as you think. Okay? I'm not saying it's good, but not as bad as you think.
And date.
What?
We need a J date.
Okay. All right. The Ravid. Okay? So the Ravid, we could say, where am I up to here? Yeah. We could say that the simplest thing to say, I think, is the Rambam and Ravid are disagreeing. The Ravid who says you only need Bi, you don't need Kiddushin, that he understands the Isser totally differently, right? The Rambam says the Isser is attaching yourself to Kahal, And the Ravid understands an Isser Bia. There's just different levels of Isser Bia. There's Isser Bia which is Arayot, and there's Isser Bia which is more Chamor, and there's Isser Bia which is less Chamor. There's Chayvei Lav, there's Chayvei Krisus, there's Chayvei Mitzvahs Bezdin, there's Issurei Aseh, there's all sorts of Issurei Bia. Right? But all the Isurim are fundamentally Issurei Bia. That I think is a simple way to say the Ravid. But you don't have to understand the Ravid that way. The Ravid could fundamentally agree with the Rambam that the Isser Bia in Chayvei Lavin is different than the Isser Arayot. The Isser Arayot would be the way I described it before, but the Isser Bia, the way the Ravid is talking about, he agrees fundamentally with the Rambam. The issue is, how do you attach yourself to the Kahal? So the Rambam says, you attach yourself to the Kahal, you have to get married and Bia. So the Ravid says, Lo Yavo B'Kal Hashem, right, is Bia also is attaching yourself to Kal Hashem. So it's not the Isser Bia per se, but it's attaching yourself to Kal Hashem. The reason I say that is because the rationale that he gives is a public policy rationale, which makes you think about public, right? Because look what he says. V'adin notein shabiyate aser. See, are you with me in the Ravid? Kidei shelo yarbeh mamzerut b'Yisrael. What do you mean? If the bia is usher, the bia is usher. What is kidei shelo yarbeh mamzerut b'Yisrael? You don't want the mamzer to have bia with kahal because you don't want more mamzerim. That has to do with protecting the kahal, right? Rather than saying the bia is usher per se. The bia is usher because it impacts negatively on the kahal. You create more mamzerim. So we want to prevent that. Right? So it could be that in principle the Rambam and Ravid agree that the prohibition of a mamzer and other chayvei lavim as well, lavo b'kahal, is fundamentally that they shouldn't enter into the whatever we define as this community called Kahal Hashem. And bia, or bia with kiddushin, is the way is the bona fide entry. And it's not, you could have a havamina, that it means that they can't live in your neighborhoods, etc., etc. So that's why the chinuch has to say, lo yavo b'Kal Hashem, is don't take it literally that they can't live here and you can't do business with them, but that's the idea. But it just means you can do business with them, but you can't marry them. But it's al mishkal, they can live here and you can do business with them, but you can't marry them. Or the Rav would say, but you can't have bia. Right? Or the Rav and the Rambam disagree fundamentally. The Rambam understands it the way I just said. Whereas the Rav would say, no, it's an Isser Bia, just like Arayot, just like Chiyuvei Kritut, but it's just a different level of severity.
Is it significant that Sefer Chinuch doesn't mention a requirement for Bia?
What?
Is it
the Sefer Chinuch is like the Rambam. Most of the time it's like the Rambam.
So we can assume that he also...
We
can, because he doesn't write Bia, right? You think it's fair to assume he requires...
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Now, the reason I said maybe it's not as bad as we might think, so to speak. Okay. There's a halacha that the parameters of which is a very important machloket, and we talked about it last year when we did Yordea, that it says, Vadai mamzer asarachmana v'lo safek mamzer. If there's a safek, whether someone's a mamzer, Gemara. Okay, the Gemara in Daf Ayin Gimel in Kiddushin. Okay, so if there's a safek, whether somebody is a mamzer. For example, we're not sure if there was a safek in his mother's get. His mother was married. She was megureshet b'safek, and then she had a child from someone else. So that case is okay. The kid is a safek mamzer. Okay, because it was a safek in the gerushin. Okay? So the Gemara says vadai mamzer asarachmana v'lo safek mamzer. Now, there's a big machloket. Just 2 minutes. Hopefully you remember something of this, right? There's a very big machloket between the Rambam and the Rashba about Sfeika Doraita L'Chumra. whether this principle of Sfeika D'Oraita L'Chumra, which appears in all over the place, right? But it appears in Beitza on Daf Gimel, for example, right? It says Sfeika D'Oraita L'Chumra. Whether that principle of Sfeika D'Oraita L'Chumra is Midoraita or Midurabanan, right? So it could be, again, you got it?
Who says what?
One second, not there, sir. Again, the principle is that if you have a suffix with regards to an Isser Torah, the instruction is to go l'chumra. That instruction to go l'chumra, is that midoraita or is that midorabanan? So that's it. Sfeika d'oraita l'chumra midoraita or sfeika d'oraita l'chumra midorabanan. So the Rambam holds that sfeika d'oraita l'chumra is only midorabanan. Okay? But the Rashba holds that sfeika d'oraita l'chumra is midoraita. Okay? According to the Rambam, Pashtut is, where did he get this idea that Tzvek D'Oraita L'Chum is only D'Rabbanan? So that means he learns that from mamzer. Mamzer is not an exception to the rule. The mamzer is an illustration of the rule. Right? So when the Gemara says Vaday mamzer Asur Achman v'lo Safek mamzer, the Gemara could have said Vaday nevela Asur Achman v'lo Safek nevela, etc. Okay? So the Rambam holds then that the mamzer is not an exception. Okay? The Rashba, who says Sfeika D'Oraisa L'Chumra is Mida Oraisa, she says mamzer is a separate Gzerat HaKatuv. There are a number of cases which are Yotz'im min HaKlal. Mamzer is one of them. Anybody remember the other one? There's another one that says that Safek is not Asur min HaTorah. Okay. It's a little esoteric, but I'm only asking because we learned it last year. Or anybody? What?
The different stores, no?
No, not Kavua.
Did it have to do with Maser and Chutz La'aretz?
Not Maser and Chutz La'aretz, Orlan Chutz
Orlan
La'aretz.
Chutz La'aretz.
Suffolk, there is no Maser and Chutz La'aretz, right? But there is Orlan Chutz La'aretz, right? There is Maser and Artzot HaSmuchot, but there isn't Maser and Chutz La'aretz per se. But Suffolk Orlan B'Chutz La'aretz, it says Halachah Moshe Sinai is mutter. Okay? So that's another example. So the question is this an exception to the rule or does it illustrate the rule, right? So according to the Rashba, it's an exception to the rule, and Pashta says, according to the Rambam, it illustrates the rule. Okay? Now, if mamzerut is an exception to the rule, okay, let's just go with that for a second. So we have to understand, what does that mean that everything else, you have a suffix, you have to go l'chumra. Okay? But if you have a suffix, mamzer, you don't go l'chumra. Okay? Why should that be? I understand that there's a drasha, right? That you could say it always ends with the drasha. It doesn't have to be for any reason. But what can it tell me? Okay? So here, you have to understand. I'm giving you like all of Hilchot Sveikot, like Mamash Al Regel Achat. I feel like
Not
right?
even on one regular.
I'm saying, okay, I'm not at both my feet off the ground. So why should a suffix be aser? Let's just think, stop for a second. Why should suffix be aser, or why should suffix be mutter? Right?
If God asks you to do something, He's asking you to be careful.
Because maybe it's aser. Why should it be mutter? Because maybe it's mutter, right? Okay. So if you look at it that way, right, that's the common sense way of looking at it. Let's look at it that way, right? So if you say suffix is aser because maybe it's aser, right? So let's just flesh that out for a second. So the Rambam says, or one girsa in the Rambam, I'm not sure if it's the correct girsa, the Rambam says that Sfeika D'Oraisa L'Chumra is midrabanan, except, you with me? Except in Chiyuvei Karet. The Rambam says in Chiyuvei Karet, Sfeika D'Oraisa L'Chumra is midoraisa. That's the Rambam Hilchos Tumas. He says it in 3 places. Hilchos Tumas Meis, I think, in the end of Perek Tet. In Sharavot HaTumah, I don't remember what Perek. No, not Sharavot. In Hilchos Kilayim and in Hilchos Isurei Bia. Okay?
Oh, what's the first one?
In Tumat Meit. Okay? So the Rambam says that if you're talking about a Chiyuv Karet, Sfeika D'Oraisa L'Chumra, there is Minat Torah. So what's the rationale to say, is all to understand what does it mean if I say Safek D'Oraisa is L'Chumra?
Severity of consequences.
Yeah, you're afraid of the consequences. In chiyuvei chayvei lavin, look, eating treif, we don't like eating treif, and we don't like eating chazer, right? But chayvei lavin is not the same thing as chiyuvei karet. So you can say like this, the isser is there, right? You have a suffix isser. Isser is there, right? The question is whether you're allowed to take a chance, as everything is a cost-benefit analysis, right? People get hit by cars crossing the street. It means you're not allowed to cross the street. There's a cost-benefit analysis. I have to take a chance. There's certain things I'm allowed to take a chance, certain things I'm not allowed to take a chance, okay? So I'm allowed to cross the street, but I'm not allowed to, like I would think, volunteer for the Red Crescent in Iraq, right? So there are different levels of risks that you're allowed to take. So the risks, you talk about physical risks, driving a car or getting on an airplane. You can also talk about halachic risk, and it has to do with the consequences that Tova is talking about. So I have to weigh the consequences. So suppose I have two pieces of meat, one of them is treif, and one of them is kasher. So there, Sveik Doraisa L'chumra, according to the Rambam, is only Midrabana. That means Midoraisa, I could eat it. Right? I have a suffix, I could eat it. Right? Why? It might be Aser. But, okay. But I'm allowed the Torah says I'm allowed to take a chance. Right? Because you don't know that it's Aser. You're allowed to take a chance. Because the worst thing that could be, so to speak, is that you're over an Isser Lo Ta'aseh. Okay? But if the consequences are Chivei Karet, so there, right, the Torah is either Shemama, don't take a chance. Chiyuvei kares don't take a chance. That's why Chiyuvei kares is Sveika L'chumra. Chayvei lavin could be Sveika L'kula, Midoraita. Okay? So then, let me look back, right, and say, what does that tell me about the nature of Chiyuvei karet as opposed to the nature of Chayvei lavin? It might not just be a question of the severity of the Isser, but it might be an issue of the nature of the Isser. And that's why I want to bring this back to mamzer1. That's very important even for the tshuva of Rav Moshe in Mishpachot Shenitma'u, that when we don't know there's a mamzer there. What is the nature of the Isser? There are really two ways of looking at the nature of all Isurim. All Isurim. And Achronim like dividing up between Isurei Doraita and Isurei Dorabanan on this question. In Brisker terminology, I apologize for using Brisker terminology, but in Brisker terminology, the question is whether something's an Isser Chefzer or an Isser Gavra. Okay? And what that means is does the prohibition reside in the Isser, or the object itself? Please turn off the phones, okay? The Isser resides in the object. I cannot consume whatever object I'm talking about. Okay? Or there's nothing in the object. The Torah says I can't, or Chachamim said that I can't consume the object. It's not about the object, it's about me.
Like Yom
right?
Kippur?
Maybe that depends on how you learn out the Yisrael on Yom Kippur. But yes. Okay. Right? Or the best example is the difference between chametz after Sha'ar Revi'it and after Sha'ar Chamishit. Right? After Sha'ar Revi'it, it's usher to eat, but you can still get hana, and there's no bayir bayimatzeh, even midrabanan. After Sha'ar Chamishit, right? So there midrabanan, it's usher bahana, and then midrabanan there's bayir bayimatzeh, right? So what's the difference between Sha'ar Revi'it and Sha'ar Chamishit? So there's what's his name? The Brisker Rav on the Rambam. So he says the difference is as follows: Sha'ar Chamishit is an extension of Sha'ar Shishit. Chachamim moved the clock back. Midoraisa chametz is aser from Vav Sha'ot, so Chachamim moved it back to an hour earlier, right? Right, so to Sha'ar Chamishit. Okay, so then everything that's true from Vav Sha'ot, Midoraita, goes back and made an Isser Cheftza on the hour before. But 2 hours before, he says that's a Gzeir of Atu Yom HaMu'unan. There it's not chametz. It's not aser yet, really. It's not Pesach, so it's not chametz bechefza. But there's an isser for me to eat this gzeira atu yom ha'mu'unan. So that's an isser gavra as opposed to an isser chefza. And the nafkamina there is that it's not asur b'hana, it's just asur b'achila, etc., etc. Okay? So, but that question, that formulation of something isser gavra and isser chefza, is a question you can ask about any isser. Right? What Achronim like to talk about is that Isurei D'Oraita are Isurei Chefza, and Isurei D'Rabbanan are Isurei Gavra. Because only God can make an Isur Chefza, in a sense. Right? That's divine, that's part of... You think that only God can make Shamayim Va'aretz. Nothing.